Brian. We're going to make some cups in Fusion today. So we're going to be mostly using the sculpt environment, which I think is a really powerful ideation tool. This is one of the cups I was just working on. So let's get started. First, I'm in the render environment, so I'm gonna go over to the design environment, and you can see this cup looks really weird because I was just monkeying around and trying different things, and I kind of made it a little wonky. But now now that I know what I want, I can build it a little bit better. So I'm going to turn those off, and I'm going to start fresh. So I'm in the design environment. Over to the left is my file browser with some of the stuff I've been working on. I'm going to click this little waffle looking thing and just get rid of that, so I got a full screen here. A lot of times I like to actually go full screen, so you just get the maximum space available. So we've got a grid down here. I'm going to try to point out things that were problems for me when I started as I go. So right now we're in the solid environment, and I actually want the form environment. It used to be called sculpt, and it's all based on T-splines. You could tell you're in this sculpt environment when you get the little purple icons. So the first thing I'm doing is, because we're making cups, I'm just going to usually start with a cylinder. If you don't see that up there, you hit the create button and you've got your choices down here. So we're choosing cylinder again. And then you'll notice my grid changed to a vertical arrangement. But if I hover over this these are the main three planes that we're dealing with. And I want to, usually a lot of these things, they're actually asking you first to click on a plane. It doesn't say that anywhere, which is kind of frustrating. It just says cylinder, but you first have to choose a plane. So I usually choose the flat plane that looks like a table surface, because we want to build up from there. So I'm going to click once there, and now I'm going to click in the center. And it's always good to work from the center. You can see this kind of red line going here, and this green line going there. This little dot right there is the center, and you might need to turn your grid snap to grid and grid layout on, so you could see this, so that we can snap there. Trying to make a model and then put it back in the center is very difficult. Can be done, but so I'm going to click once, and I'm not double clicking or anything. I'm just clicking, and then I get this kind of circle I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to say that's maybe 2 inches. So my grid is laid out on inches. I'll show you in a second what to do if it's not. So I click once, and this thing pops up. Now don't do anything yet. Don't close anything or hit return, because now we can adjust the amount of kind of grid lines in there. There's loops and that go around here, and then these lines here. I forget what they're called, but I could grab arrows and move them up and down, and these little slider things give me more detail. And this, mostly it's not important until you're trying to do things like, we're going to add some handles to the cup, and so we want some kind of predictable numbers. So for example, here I know I'm going to add a handle, so I'm going to put 20 grid spaces around here. And that gives me a smaller, if you think of the handle's going to attach to these little grid spaces, that gives me a smaller little grid space so that the handle's not too wide. And then up and down, I like to actually start with there's basically 3 lines, the top, the bottom, and 1 in the center, and that gives you the smoothest curves. So you notice I changed it here with this little slider, but I can also change that over here and actually just punch in numbers. I can go back to this also if I click on this little slider. That little number input is the same thing, so I can put 2 there. And think of it as we've got 2 grid spaces, but that's actually 3 lines that make up those grid spaces, and there's a difference there. So let's just say, we need some height here. I'm just making this up as I go along, but let's say 3, and we'll say okay. Like I said, the nice thing about the sculpt environment versus a CAD environment is that it lets you just kind of try and start with almost nothing, with no idea of what you're doing, and then just start messing around, as opposed to most of the solid input stuff. It's asking you for kind of specific numbers and things. And if you don't know what you're making yet, it's kind of hard to know what numbers you're doing. So did you notice I just grabbed these, let me go back, cancel this. Whoops. So if I double click, or sorry, right click, and you should have a 3-button mouse, it really makes this a lot easier. I'm actually using my Wacom tablet with my pen, and then also a little 3D mouse called the Space Navigator by Connex. And that allows me to navigate, move around, and then select things pretty easily. So if I right click, I set up my Wacom pen so that when I double or click the little button, it gives me a right click or a double click on the opposite. The top one I did double click, and the bottom one I did right click, so it makes it a lot easier. So you edit form allows you to manipulate this in all kinds of different ways. To select different pieces, there's a couple different things. If I double click on a loop, whoops, double click, it will select this whole loop, and then you get this little triad thing. And each of these little icons does something different, so that the arrows move up and down or left and right. And most of this stuff we don't really want to move left and right, because then it's going to make our cup all wonky. We're dealing with symmetry here. So we got the up and down. There's some of these that won't do anything right this moment because I've only got a loop selected. So like this bar here will scale, but it's not scaling anything because it's just a line, so I can't scale a line. This center button, the center of the triad is kind of powerful because it's going to stretch from the center. So I don't have to worry about realigning that every time. It's just going to deal with everything kind of based on this axis of symmetry. So I've kind of made this fluted thing right now, but I want to go back down to this one. So I'm going to double click on that line. And this is the reason I usually just use 3 in the height, because whatever I do, it's going to make the smoothest curve possible between those 3 lines. And I can add more in there later, but I'm going to build a kind of traditional looking cup. And this is where the designing in 3D is really pays off, because I could do a profile and kind of guess at what it's going to look like, but this is showing me in real time what's happening. So a lot of times I'm sitting here fussing with these loops, just trying to get that curve right, so it has a nice kind of flow to it, nice balance. And I kind of like where this is going, but I don't know if I like it coming back in on itself. So I'm going to double click on that top loop and expand that just a little bit more. And down here, this is the the percentage right now that so sometimes I just click on this and it says I just increased that by 1.076, and sometimes making little micro adjustments is kind of hard. So I'm going to actually go back in here and say, well, let's try 1.1. And that looks pretty good. Or I might go 1.13. Yeah, there. I just wanted a little bit of a taper coming down. So let's say okay. And now I'm going to throw a bottom on this. I could do this in a couple different ways, but I'm going to show you the way I do it. So I'm rotating this upside down so we can see it. And I double clicked on that edge. And now this is part of the power of sculpt environment. I'm going to go back to that same old edit form. And now my triad's upside down, so it's kind of giving me an optical illusion, but I'm going to grab this center one, and notice if I grab it and just move it, it resizes it. But if I hold down Option, it's going to give me a whole new edge. And you see that lines kind of jumped around. It does some funny stuff because it's calculating the smoothest transition between all 3 of those now. And so I just added this new one that gave me this little bit of a curved edge. And the tighter the lines are, the more kind of quicker the transition will be. So I'm going to hold down Option again, and I'm going to click on the center. And if you drag both ways, one way it's going to go out, and the other way it's going to go in. And so usually what I like to do is do 2 on the bottom, like this. And then going down to 0 doesn't really work, so you got to just fill that hole. But you'll notice that like now I can actually take, I've got a little control over the bottom here. I'm going to edit this. I'm going to just pull this up a little bit so the bottom is kind of dished out. And if I didn't like this curve that's happening here, you could kind of look at one of the edges. It's the combination of these two loops that make how loose or tight that curve is. And so if I go too far out, you can see it starts to kind of back into each other. So I want it to kind of roll in, but be kind of a tight edge. So this is, again, purely visual. And then this one here, depending on the height and the size of it, I can change this appearance as well. So I might want a kind of sharper edge or a kind of softer rolling edge. And I could see that this curves in a little bit right now, and I don't like that, so I want this to kind of, I want to enlarge this a little bit. So again, I'm purely doing this visually. So that's the bottom of the cup. I want to fill this hole as well, and this maybe we'll do it now. Sometimes I wait till later to deal with this, but up under the top here, we've got all these different options, and again, you're not going to see the same ones I have up here. They're all buried in here, and you can modify your toolbar to use the ones that you use the most. You can throw them up there. So I'm gonna go to fill hole, which is these. They're kind of in little groups, and if you think about when you're looking for stuff, creating things will make a new object, and modify will modify something that's already existing. So I want to fill a hole. I'm not creating a new object, I'm modifying the one I have. So I'm going to choose this, and it's going to do something weird here. Let's try it. So I don't need to double click here, it just knows that that's something I want to fill. And there's 3 options: reduce star, fill star, and collapse. And so let's go fill star for a minute. It makes this kind of, and when I turn it, the grid goes away just for a second because it can't deal with the real time. Even though it looks all smooth and everything, sometimes this causes some problems. There's a lot of geometry going on here. And when I say reduce star, it tries to break this down into, the reason it's doing this weird shape, it likes squares. So it's trying to break everything down into a square. So if you kind of look at, even though they don't look square, they have 4 sides to each of these loops. Now, if I wanted to do further modification on this, this might be kind of a problem, but this is the bottom of the cup, so I'm just going to say okay. But let me show you the last one, collapse. This one creates this little sharp point in the center where all these are trying to resolve around this one central point. So when you render this up, you'll see like a little glitch there. So this collapse doesn't always work. It works when you just have 4 edges, that's totally fine. And I'll show you how to do that on the next cup. But let's do this right now. We'll go back to our reduced star. So that gave me the bottom of my cup. And now we're gonna add a handle to this as well. But we're gonna first, I'm gonna thicken it. We did this in my class, and we added the handle first, and then when you try to thicken it, it tries to thicken the handle on the inside, and everything gets a little wacky. So there is an order of events here. I'm going to go up, we're going to modify it again, and it's down near the bottom, thicken. I'm going to click on this, and we kind of discovered that like 0.2 inches is a good dimension to start with. You could do more or less, but I'm making this ceramic cup, and they're usually a little bit thick. So now I have some options. The thicken type, I want, I can do sharp, soft, or no edge. So let's do sharp first. And that gives us kind of a flat top. And actually, let me jump over here. I'm talking about dimensions, and you could do this in millimeters as well. But if you don't have your document in inches, if you click on this little gear icon one, and the first thing up in there says units. And if I click on that, the little if I click on this unit inches, I get the little icon of the little pencil and ruler here, and then I have to click on that, and it says inches or millimeters. And the nice thing about this is that it converts it, like when you're in Rhino and you go to millimeters or inches, it keeps the same units, but the whole model is effectively way smaller, way bigger. This doesn't matter. You can switch back and forth, and it won't mess up your model. But I'm going to go back to my inches, and I can't save this because this is the default. So I mean I'm already in inches, so I'm going to cancel that. All right, so I've got this nice flat edge here, and this will work in some instances really nicely. I could put a radius on here later if I convert this into a solid object. But let's go back and thicken it again. And if I right click and go straight up, just push up on my mouse and then let go, you'll notice it says repeat change active units. Oh, sorry, that's what I just did. So I don't want to do that. Let's go right click to edit form. It'll do the last, if you up is the last command you just did. So edit form, we are going to go, actually, sorry, I don't want to edit form. I want to double click this, create, not create, I'm going to modify, thicken. And so now let's do a soft edge instead and see what that looks like. Okay, so you see it just kind of rolls over the top. It's a little bit sharp, even though it's kind of thick. And so I might want to control that a little bit further. But usually I like the soft edge, unless I'm going to do some post operations. And then let's do one more. We're going to repeat thicken now. We can use that mouse up, option mouse up. Tspline body, soft, no edge. And let's go back to -20. And what this does is it basically makes a copy that's smaller that has no edge to it. And so this is really a separate object. This actually might come into our advantage. Let's do this. I'm gonna leave this one here. I'm gonna double click on this edge. I'm gonna push this down, edit form, and I'll turn it off. We're gonna use it later for the liquid that's in this cup. So I've got that, and let's turn this off. All right, so, oh, sorry, the hierarchy over here, I see it's got these bodies. I made some bodies before, so they're in the same file, but I've turned them off. So this body is my cup, and maybe, sometimes when you get a lot of stuff in here, it becomes a little difficult. So I'm going to name this cup C-U-P. And you have to hit return when you're done naming it to let that accept it. And then on this inner one, this is going to be my liquid. So I'm going to click on it once, click on it twice to highlight it. What will this be? C-O-F-F-E. We'll make it coffee. And I hit return, accepts that. And I turned that off again. So now let's go back to our cup. And we're going to do a couple things. We're going to make the inner edge again. So we're going to make this modify thicken. And I could go out or in. So I don't know why negative is now going outward, but that's fine. Let's just delete that. And that will go back inward. And this time I want the soft edge. I'm good with that. And instead of 0.20 inches though, because this program has a little issue when the surfaces are coincident, I forget what they call it, but they're basically exactly the same surface. So instead of going 0.20, I'm going to go 0.199. And that'll make it just ever so slightly smaller than the liquid on the inside. So there's a little air gap, and then when we're rendering it up, it'll look better. Soft edge, okay. And there we go. Now, I didn't like the way this top edge is. It's a little bit sharp, so I've got this loop that's kind of saying, defining this transition, and then this loop is defining the inside. And the reason it's so tall is because the spacing in between my loops is really far apart. So it's trying to make a real graceful turn around there before it heads back down to the next one. So I can just simply add another loop in here, and a bunch of different ways to do this as well. But in this case, I'm going to modify and insert edge, second one down. And then you get the same little slider thing, and it's showing this green edge. And when I move this slider, it goes up and down. I actually want to go over right up to the top. And with this will give me a little more control on the top edge. So let's hit OK. And now you notice that kind of gives it a little bit sharper, cleaner top edge. And I think I like that. I'm just going to leave it as is. Now I need to, I'm going to add a handle in here. We did this in class where, oh, I didn't do this. We did 10 grid things, and that gave us a nice spacing. I want to, actually, no, I can use 2 of them. Okay, all right, I'm just talking to myself here. I need to add another edge in here so I can start pulling my loop of my handle out. And I like to do this in whole loops. This is, Tsplines is really created for this concept of making edges that merge into a T shape. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's go over to modify. And I'm going to insert an edge. Right. So I want to move this down a little bit. So I'm holding down Shift. I select 2 things. And I'm going to move this down to roughly where I want my handle to start. Maybe about there. And if I got these choices here, simple a lot of times works, but in this case, let's say, okay. And you kind of see the cup moved a little bit. It made a kind of a weird, slightly different surface there. And I'm going to undo that again and redo it. And this time I'm going to say exact. So I'm going to move this down. Let's say that's my start. So instead of simple, I'm going to say exact. And what that'll try to do is keep the shape that you have. Oh, didn't do it. Maybe it can't do it. So let's try this one more time. We'll do this on simple for a second, and I'll show you what I mean. So right now, these 3 meet up into a T shape. And a lot of these other programs can't deal with this T intersection. They need a full loop going all the way around. But as I mentioned, this kind of morphed my shape a little bit. So instead of doing a just a little section, I'm going to do that all the way around. So I'm going to take this edge and use that modify insert edge. And now I've got an edge coming down about where I want it. Again, I can kind of move this up and down. And I think this will work on exact. Sometimes it'll make a lot of extra lines in here just to kind of get to what you were looking for. So that looked okay. So I'm going to use, the handle's going to grab, let's take this one. I'll double click here and say repeat insert edge. And now I'm going to do it different. I'm going to say, instead of a single, I'm going to say both sides of this line. And I'll pull this down. Try to make these roughly the same. And now I'm gonna start pulling out my handle. I'm gonna look at the this green line or the red line as my kind of axes that I'm looking for. Up in this browser, I'm going to close the document settings. There's next. Some of these are always there, named views. The origin, if I click on that, that gives me the planes, the 3 planes, and it's always good to be working, especially if we're working with symmetry, off of one of these planes so that we can choose one of those as our axis of symmetry. And so right now, if you see, if I click on this one, this green line aligns with that, so that's what I want to use. And I'm going to grab 2 of these edges here and 2 of these edges here just by holding down Shift. And this is where now we're going to start getting into this kind of trippy T-spline space where everything I've done up to now you could easily do in any modeling program. But this is where the power of T-splines, or in this case, the fusion form tool. So I'm going to grab just my arrow, click on that. You can click on it once just to select it, because sometimes if you're trying to click and drag, you drag one of the wrong ones. And I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows and pull this arrow out. And it does some kind of weird thing at first. It kind of jumped around. It's trying to make the smoothest shape between these 2 bumps. And I'm going to turn this into a handle in a minute. But I got this, and then I'm going to use this, I've turned to this direction, I'm going to use this little edge bar. This is just scaling in 2 dimensions. So I'm just scaling in this direction. This would scale up and down. And notice they're going away from each other. Actually, I want that because they're going to kind of fan out a little bit. And then I'm going to hold down Option again and pull out one more time. And you see each time I do this, it kind of adds another little loop. And it's really easy to put too many points of information in here, and then it's hard to control it. So the fewer lines that you get, the easier this is to deal with. So I'm going to stop for a second and show you what happens. This also doesn't make sense at first. I'm going to take these two and delete them. So I right click, delete, and all of a sudden it opens way back up. So what it was doing before was trying to make the softest transition between all these grids. And now this might totally throw you off, but are you ready for this? I'm going to go Control 1. And Control 1 shows me the actual grid that we're building. So we're building this grid, and then what we're really looking at is a mathematical smoothing of all these points. And every point is related to every other point. So if I open this up now, I can start to see what the hell. But as they say, it's like when you get into this, it's actually a good idea to look at it in this mode. Because I can see here, this one goes up and then it goes straight across. This one kind of comes down and goes straight across. And it's making some interesting kinks. And so let's go back now. If we go Control 3, it should go back to our smooth mode. And incidentally, Control 2 does a hybrid of the both, but I don't really like this. It's too confusing to me because I don't really, it's giving me the grid, but it's also showing me the smooth. Up to you. So I'm going to go back to Control 3, and just get the smooth. And now I can actually look at that and see this kind of goes uphill a little bit and then it starts smoothing out. So let's get rid of this altogether. Not all of it. So I'm going to click on this edge, and then I'm going to go to the next one down, and it likes to, if you double click, you can get a whole loop. So I'm going to click on this surface, double click, and I got that whole loop, and I'm going to go over, right click, and delete. And also, this is a good time to talk about selection tools. So if I go over here to select, it says selection filter, and there's all these different things checked off. So this is going to give me my most options right now. The two most important things to know are, one, if I select the select all button, again, it deselects everything, and then I could go through and select very specific things. So again, we're in the form environment, but it's really based on T-spline. So that's why it says T-spline body, T-spline edges, T-spline faces, and T-spline vertices. So the vertice is this thing, the faces is this thing, and the edges are these. And so I can choose, usually I just have select all on, and then the select through is good for dragging a selection. Let's do that right now. So on the bottom one, I want to get rid of all of this, the second two groupings here. So if I drag across it to from right to left, I can just include these and it will select them. If I select left to right, it will only select the things that are fully encompassed in that selection. And so that's just this edge. So get used to trying both of those to see if you get what you want. Now I have select through, which grab the back side of this as well. So let's delete that. And then let me show you back here, selection filters. Let's turn off select through. And we'll try that again, and I'll select, I'm going from right to left. And I said, it looks like I got everything, but it's not selecting through. So it's everything that is visible in this view is getting selected. And notice even some of the edges, but not all of them. So I'm going to go back up here, select through. Now drag across there and delete this. Boom. All right, so now I got the beginning of my handle, and I'm going to make a totally new handle. And you could do this by making a curve, and maybe I'll do that on another one, but I'm going to stay in the T-spline environment. So up here in the right-hand corner, there's a little a little cube that's, if I grab and move around, you can see my pivot point is kind of wonky. So I'm going to go back to zoom window. That should get me in the center. And There we go. So now I'm pivoting around that central thing. So if you don't have a 3-button mouse, sometimes you got to go into this mode to do this. And I noticed that it kind of tumbles around and gets a little confusing. So if you click on this orbit down here, you get similar options. But if I click and move down and say constrained orbit, that tries to keep it more, it's easier to just kind of pan around, spin it like on a tabletop without getting it all totally crooked. So I prefer that view, but I'm using a mouse, 3D mouse. So if I click on one of the surfaces, it goes to the orthographic view. And I think if your thing is not set up that way, there's a bunch of options here. Shaded. I want shaded with visible edges. Mesh display, environment. You can change those, play around with these. Effects. Forget where. Camera. So I like working in perspective with ortho faces. And what that means is that when I go to a pure right view, it turns into orthographic view. So now I'm going to create something. I'm going to create a face. And so this is just creating one, it's like a sheet of paper. And this is where I see a lot of the tutorials, I think, do it disservice. Because what you want to do is keep the fewest faces as possible and then let the smoothness make it clean and smooth. If you put too many in here, it gets lumpy. So I'm going to start with just this normal mode. These two things are all good. And then again, it's not prompting me, but I need to select a plane that I'm going to work on. And notice that my origin plane, that little kind of yellowish orange thing appears down here. If it doesn't, go up and click on origin. But I'm going to click on that. Now it kind of stopped highlighting. And now I can start working. And let's do this first. So I got to click 4 points to make a one grid space. And then I'm going to start on that same grid space and click on the first 2 edges and then go over. And I got to start turning the corner. So I'm making, and again, I want kind of long spaces in between. I can adjust these. It's easier just to get them down and then adjust them after. And so start on the first edge and then go up, boom. And now I have to hit escape or OK to enter this. So, and now you can see it's kind of curved, smoothed it out. Now this is just one flat plane right now. It's not anything. We're going to extrude it and get some thickness to it in a minute. But I can see it got a little pinched here. So this is where I might start editing this. And I could go back, it smoothed it all out. But if I go back to Control 1, I can go back to just that object in its little square mode. And this time I'm going to use this central plane, which allows me to kind of move in 2 directions at once. And I want to get these relatively consistent thickness all the way around, because unless I want some tapering or something or other, but I could select on either the points or the edges or the and let's try this one more, a little bit there. Okay, let's say, all right. So that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to go back. I need to just select one edge of it anywhere and Control 3. And that gives me my smooth look. And before I extrude this, I'm going to maybe make it a little smaller by moving just this whole panel. So edit form again. I'm going to move this way in. And this one up, and this edge. I'm going to mesh this into this object, and so I want to get this kind of close to the center, and kind of squint my eyes and look at it. And go, yeah, it looks like a good handle. Okay. And let's say I actually wanted a little bit more curve in the center here. I could actually add another line as well. So I could go modify, insert point, which I could insert edge, but insert point will allow you can insert multiple points, which make a line. So I click those 2 edges and say OK. And now I can grab just that edge. And right here, I'm having a problem just grabbing that edge. I see it kind of hovers over it. And this is where, if I really just wanted that edge, I would go to my selection filters, turn everything off and say T-spline edges. And then now there's no problem selecting that. Edit form, and I could pull that out just a little bit. And then I've got my whole surface there. So now I'm going to extrude this, and I am going to, hold on. Now I'm going to, I built this little flat handle. I'm going to extrude it out. So I'm going to go to create and extrude. So this seems like I'm modifying this thing, but I'm kind of really creating something new. So I'll double click. No, I'll just select this whole thing. Okay. All right, so I got this whole object selected, and I want to extrude on both sides symmetrically. So I'm going to turn this on, and I'm just going to do this visually. So I like the fact that they have arrows instead of just numbers. A lot of times you have no idea where to start with a number. So you got to enter something and then start guessing to get close. This arrow makes it really easy because I think I'm going to make this a little fatter. So purely designing this as I go. All right, so I got a nice handle, and then I got this kind of landing pad, and then I got to connect these two. And this, I'm going to weld this. I'll do it two ways. So I'm going to try to select. I'm going, what happened? How come I can't select my faces? Oh yeah, I forgot. I changed my selections to just the edges. So I'm going to go back and say select all. And let's delete these two. Hold down Shift, right click, and then delete. Or I think I could just use keyboard delete. And this is a little bit tricky because we want the same amount of edges. So it won't join unless, I think that they can even be even, and it will figure out if you're close. But I'm going to try to weld this to that. So I'm going to do each of these differently. This first one, I'm going to use the weld command. And this is kind of fun. So I'm going to create, modify weld. Where is it? I always forget. Weld vertices. And now it's in the smooth mode, and it brings up all the little points because that's the only thing I can manipulate. But as soon as I start welding, it's going to turn into box mode. So, and I want to grab the first point is going to move to the second point. So I'm going to say I'm at this point to match that point. And now I'm in this box mode, and you're like, what happened? But as you go around, as soon as you finish this up, it will, oh, well, there it did. I guess as soon as I started, it went back into, so it's a little hard now because I gotta kind of keep track of which pieces. So I'm gonna wait until this reses up here, and I'm saying, okay, this comes around, this goes around. So that's got to weld to that. This one's got to weld to that one. And then this looks like a whole bunch, but really all I got to do is weld this last one together, and voila, I've got the handle. Now I can manipulate this just like everything else, and I can see I've got this little bit of a hump here. It's a little thick in the middle. So I might grab, let's edit this just a little bit before we go on. I might grab this edge and push it up. So I like the fact that it's kind of tapering, but it was just tapering a little too much. It's actually probably nice to have this little crook in here so when you're holding it, but maybe I will grab these two and push that down a little bit. Just a little bit. I do a lot of micro adjustments because it really does make a big difference. Little incremental changes can make a big difference. Okay, so I like the way that looks. Now the second one I'm going to do differently. Like I said, I'm going to use the bridge command instead. So I'm going to click over on the right-hand side, drag across to select this, and hopefully I got my select through. If you don't, let's go back here. And your selection option may be different as well. So you got window selections, which I'm using. You might have freeform, or you can paint, which is kind of weird, but I am usually working just in this top one, which is the square, what do they call it? Window selection. And then go back down my selection filters, make sure select through is clicked so I can grab that whole thing. Whoops, do it again. And then I'm just going to hit my delete key. No, I'm going to do Oh, did it? Yeah. And now I want to bridge from this one to that one. But before I bridge, I could see that this is, I'm going to click this whole loop and edit. And I'm going to squish the top to bottom dimension because I kind of know I'm already going to do that. And maybe I'm going to pull this down a little bit more just to get, just set up a little closer where I want it to go. So now I just want to make a jump from there to there. And that's where the bridge command comes in. And that one is, where is it? Bridge up here. And the bridge command, it asks you, like a lot of these dialog boxes, see the blue selection, it says side one. So let's double click this. And it selects, whoops, the whole loop. And then I could click down on side two and double click this, but it actually knows if there's two things that are not connected, it'll automatically figure out side two. But a lot of times pay attention to these dialog boxes because they're actually prompting you to do something, and a lot of times it's not clear why it's not working, but it's because you're not following the steps in the dialog box. So the next thing is follow curve. If I could actually have this follow a specific curve. I don't have that in there right now, so I'm just gonna, I could preview it. And preview is actually a good thing because I could see it kind of in box mode and it looks more or less like these are going straight. Every once in a while, something is twisted. And that's what these two little arrows are showing me. So for example, if I click on this side, and it says flip direction 1, flip direction 2. I forget which one I started with. I think this is 1, yeah. So these arrows are pointing in different directions, and you can kind of see these boxes are twisting up, and so I'm going to get this weird, unusable twisted surface. And so pay attention to these if they're not in the right place, and if they're not, I can move them. So I could click over here. Let's say I'll click this one and this one. And then I got to flip that back. And now they're pointing in the same direction. I got this smooth looking thing. And then it's asking me how many faces in between. And usually I like 2 or 1. Again, if it get too many faces in there, it just makes it lumpy. It makes it really hard to control the curvature. So I'm going to leave 2 and maintain it. Everything's okay. And then notice it now, it just made some transitional spaces in between there. And I could get rid of this one, just double click it. Let's see what happens if I didn't have it. Delete. You can see it's a little bit smoother curve, but it might not be as controlled as I want it. So I want edit form. Might want to move this down a little bit. And so what's happening is as these loops are going around, you need them to go, this needs to be horizontal, and then we need them to start going around the corner. And actually that last one kind of probably helped the transition. But let's see. Yeah, I'll go back and put it in. I'm going to undo twice. There it is. And so what I'm kind of talking about is if I have too many in here and I mess with this a little too much, I can get these really kinked surfaces because I've got a control on either side of this that's saying do something, and then in the middle it's saying do something else. And so having all these, you really have to be careful to kind of get it right where you want. In fact, because I'm seeing how kinked that is, I'm just going to delete that again and worry about the 2 edges instead. So we'll take this one, edit form, and maybe I'm going to just smoosh it down a little bit more. I'm just trying to get it something similar to the top. And here again, I've got 3. And so if I wanted to move this out a little bit, I'm going to have that same problem where I'm going to get a little bit of a kink or something or other. And so in this case, a lot of times if you want to get a little bit more curve in there, I can use soft modification. And this gives this kind of fall off. And so now when I edit it, it edits the one curve I'm using a lot, and then the ones next to it a little bit less. And so you get this kind of smoother transition. And you could change the weight and the fall off on this, and this is the kind of red color that you see fanning out is fading up to these white ones. That's kind of where it ends, and that seems pretty good to me. But let's see if we push this in. And sometimes I go purposely too far to see what the thresholds are. Maybe I want this top corner a little tighter. So let's push this up a little bit. Okay. And I'm gonna, the closer the loops are to each other, the more effect they will have. So I'm gonna try to move this one a little bit more in between the two edge loops. And then that will give me a little bit of a smoother curve. And I might need to rotate it a little bit to kind of keep the thickness in the right place. So visually. And then I could see this one's getting a little pinched up on the top. So I might need to take this one and edit form and maybe just stretch it ever so slightly. And usually it takes me just a little while to build the basic form, and then a lot of time of this just kind of exploration and pushing and pulling. And sometimes your whole wireframe gets so out of whack that you kind of have to rebuild it, but at least you know where you're going at that point. Let's say, like, for example, if I took this middle one, let's just try some things. I'm going to stretch it this direction so it has a little more width right in the middle, so it fits in your palm a little bit better. Maybe that's a little too much. Or cancel that. Or undo. Let's do it with the soft modification. So double click the loop, turn on soft mod, and stretch a little bit. And now, yeah, that looks good. Okay. So now I'm going to go back into my coffee body. So I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to turn this one on. And I'm going to do some, I mean, I just had this little idea of when you have coffee, it's got this surface tension that kind of grabs onto the edge and curves up just a little bit. So I'm going to see if I can do this. So I've got the kind of open top here, and I got to start coming across, but I don't want it to roll off like I did before. So I'm going to click in the center, and I'm going to hold down Option. And if I drag across, you can see I kind of rounded that corner off. Don't want that. So I'm going to hold down Option and I think Command. Let's try that. Yeah, and that gave me a sharp edge. And so I want to come in just a little bit. I'm going to push this down a little bit. And then I'm going to come in again. Whoops, I'm doing both of them again. So now just Option. And I'm going to come in once. And I'm going to try something else. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to see if I can get that little kind of ripple effect. So I'm going to actually do a couple of these. Doop, doop, doop. I'm holding Option the whole time and just clicking again and again in the center until I get down into a central zone. And then I'm going to take every other one of these loops and pull it up. So I'm going to take this one and this one, double click, and I'll pull those up. And this may be a little goofy. It might look a little too forced, but we'll see what happens. And then I close that little hole in the center. So let's go to Modify, Fill Hole, there it is. And just click on one edge of this. And now it's doing that same thing. I think this will be okay because it's in the center. So let's just take what we got here. And then this edge, even though I started kind of close, it pulled it a little further out. So maybe I'm going to add another edge here by using Modify, Insert Edge. And actually, I'll do two. Sure, I got the insertion side on both right now. I don't necessarily need exact, so usually try to stay on simple until you need exact, because that will make less lines. So this one, I want to edit form. I'm going to push this one out a little bit by using that central navigator thing. And then, so I'm going to skip this one, and then this one is going to, I'm going to make a little bit bigger first and then pull it up. So I get one more ring of bloopiness. I don't know if anybody saw Jurassic Park when the cup water was vibrating because the dinosaurs were walking around. This is kind of going to be that effect. All right, so I've got two things done now. I got a cup and some liquid on the inside, and something weird looks. Well, let's try. Oh, it's. I think it's seeing some of the shapes. I don't know what's going on. It looks a little weird, but let's try putting some materials on this. So I could throw the materials on now, or I could go into my render environment, which will show me a little bit better. This is a preview render, so it's not quite the final look. The cup looks pretty good, actually. Let's see what we got for appearance. I think that's the basic default material. I was playing around earlier trying to make something that looked like coffee. They have liquids, but they got like pool water and stuff. So I'm going to try this glass with a heavy color, and I just drag that onto that shape, and then I'm going to go back up here, and this upper part is all the colors I've used and am using, and in this case I'm going to double click on this, and like I wanted this to look kind of more coffee like, so I'm going to pick a more coffee color. So I'm going to make it kind of rich brown. I wish they showed you a preview of that one color you're looking at, but kind of dark. We'll say done and close this, and now the shadow is kind of coming towards me, and it might make the whole handle in shadow, which I don't want. So I'm going to go up under this little setup that's got the little sphere in a corner of a room looking thing, and this brings up this dialog box. The first one says the settings and environment library. So we got to choose an environment, and they don't have a lot of good interior ones. I wish they had like an office interior restaurant or something or other, but I'm going to choose warm light for now. So I think that's what I have. Let's see if I drag this one out. I think if you double click on them. Let's try this. Yeah, it's thinking, there we go. Yeah, so that's the snowy field. And if I rotate down here, you can kind of see this out. Hey, well, a nice warm cup of coffee on a snowy day. Wait, that might be good. But you may not see that environment, so that's in settings, and where it says background, you can either do solid color, which is probably what is default, is something like this, and also this little triad, or the planes is kind of bothering me right now, so I'm going to go back up into the origin and just click that little eyeball off. And now the shadow's in a different place, but if I wanted to, let's go back. I want the environment, so I'm going to change from solid color to environment. And let's just try rendering this first. So this looks very washed out, but once I go up to render, which is this little metal ball with the green arrow, this is the in-computer render. And now I could see that that material that looked really great is some kind of translucent material, and now it looks super weird. But after I let it res up for a while, it'll look better, but I don't like. Also, my coffee, I think my glass is so reflective, though, even though it's colored, it's not really showing me the color. So I am going to go back, and you have to click stop on this render. And I thought I turned off my origins. And let's change the material again. Appearance. So for an enamel cup, I played around a little bit, and I think just the paints work the best. So you got to open up these folders, and then glossy, open that up, and I'm just going to use paint glossy white. And I think that will look a little bit better. And again, some of these things look pretty close to what they're doing. I can leave that window open because I might need to still mess with it. I think this snowy environment with the white cup is not the right thing. So let's go change that before I go too much further. I'm going to close that. Go back and open up this little eyeball thing, environment library. And you might also have, you may be trying to click on these things and nothing's happening, because the There's a little, there should, in yours there might be a little arrow in the corner, and that means you have to download it first. So click on that arrow, and once the arrow goes away, then you can grab it and move it over. So let's try warm light and drag this out. And if it changes right away, it worked, but I've already downloaded all these. So now that color looks a little nicer, and I get some cool reflections on the ripple. And the glass may not be the right material, but my shadow is still in the wrong place. And so I'm going to click on this little thing that says position, click on that, and it brings up this dialog box. And I use this a lot, actually, because I like to get my shadow not blocking the direction that, like I might do something like this where the shadow is kind of covering a little bit of the handle, but not all the handle. So let's try that. I'll do a little quickie preview. I think I'm going to change the coffee color if this doesn't work. Yeah, this is terrible. I think it's just too reflective. So I'm going to go back to my settings and see if I can find something better. Glass color. Let's try light blue, just see what difference this makes. Nope. Not at all. So glass may not be my best option. I did it earlier and it looked okay. The liquid, you would think there would be a good juice or something in here, but it's just water. And I tried those and they're not that great either. So let's try swimming pool. Yeah, see, same thing. Let's maybe we'll just try it opaque for a minute. Or maybe actually let's try plastic, clear plastic that's colored. So we got opaque, textured, translucent. Now let's try translucent. Maybe that's what we want. And any of these colors I can change. So let's see, glossy red. Let's see what this does. Come on, sometimes this doesn't behave properly. Okay, this is getting a little closer. So now I go to the top where this is, double click on this, and let's change this a little more brown and a little darker. And this is a little complex in the what we're seeing here on the surface is one thing. We've got a little bit of roughness, which is probably why it's not so reflective. But if we go into advanced, there's more details in here. The translucency has a color in its own, and it just shows you this code. So I gotta, these I've messed with a little bit before, but actually I'm gonna leave this where it is. Cancel that, cancel this, and we'll let this render up a little bit. It takes a while. If you look down on the right hand thing, we've got a little blue bar that's moving along, and when we get up to this arrow, that's where it will stop. I could push this arrow over, so I got excellent, final, infinite. If I push it over to final, it'll make a nicer, cleaner render. The excellent mode is pretty clean, but it's a little bit grainy. Sometimes that grain looks like photographic grain, so it's actually kind of a nice detail to it. Anyway, so I think I'll stop and let this render up, and we'll start our next lesson. But you can kind of see the little ripples in there. They sort of worked. Like I said, it's a little much. If I had a little drip dropping in there, then it would make a little more sense. But why is it rippling like it is? The cup looks pretty good, though. I love the way the Fusion handles the transitions between the this sculpted body and this handle. When I pulled that out, it's got this really beautiful G2 curvature continuous surface, which is, you could do it in Alias and Rhino and things, but you kind of need to know what you want and then build to that. This allows you to play around and then find what you want. And sometimes I might end up rebuilding this in something like Fusion or sorry, Alias or Rhino. Let me show you actually one more thing because this is looking pretty good. Let's just save this. So if we go up to the this little top bar here, and we got a little floppy disk icon, which probably none of you have ever seen a floppy disk, but that's what that save is. I'll click on that, and it usually brings up a couple dialog things. This first thing is just you can't change anything anyway, so we'll say okay, and then we got to name it. And the first time you save it, it's got a name, it's fine, you could just save. But the second time, it just keeps that same name. So you usually have to add something to it so that it will not rewrite over the last one. Default is ping. I'm saving this into my two places. On my, right here, CCA master is my local Fusion file, and then save to my computer. I check that as well. And I want to change this to my desktop. So I'm click on these little 3-bar things. Oh, and I didn't save my project. So this is really dangerous. I should be saving every few minutes. It does crash. It lives, you know, they keep on cloud updating stuff. Desktop, here we go, and open, and save. But I could save in this mode too, but let's try it, Command S, user saved. And this is a little bit unclear, but I could name this and say cup 1. Okay, because this is the state where I just finished this one cup. So I can go back in time and look at any of these things and see that this says this is V2. There's a history here which is loading up, and it's going to show me the different save things. So I could go back in time to any one of those save states. But I'm going to go over here and stop this render for a second because I want to do one more cool thing. So I've got these cups, and the rim of it is a different color, and then the interior is a different color. And so instead of coloring the whole object, which just says bodies and components, I'm going to cover just faces. And so this is kind of a pain because I got to select all of these faces. Let's see if this works. Yeah, this does this goofy thing. Here, wait, close this. Let's go back. I can't remember if this will remember my selection, but I'm going to try to drag. I'm going to get back into the right view and then just drag across this whole top here. So I've got the top selected. Now let's go into, well, let's color. So I can color in any mode. I want to modify this, modify the appearance. And it looks like that stayed selected. I want faces, and now I want a different material. Let's just do this just to see if this works. Okay, now when I hover over this, it's trying to select the whole entire thing. And I notice sometimes if I turn this bodies off, in fact, I'll turn off body. Yeah, let's just try this. Yep, still doing it. Selection filters. I think I want just, yikes, this thing gets a little touchy. T-spline faces, I believe, is what I want. Try this one more time. Still on faces. Nope. Guess I gotta select it again. Okay, so let's close this. Reopen it. Now every time I open this up, it defaults to bodies, so I gotta go back to faces. And then let's see if I can drag across here and do this again. I may not like this. Oh, and then each time I go back, all of these became select again. So let's just do this manually. I'm going to close it one more time. Repeat appearance. Okay, so I'm going to say faces. Now I'm going to go over and say unselect everything and just T-spline faces. And let's just, the first time I could do this, I can click part of this and then double click and it gives me the loop. Let's do this one by one. So I'll drag a color onto that. Boom, yeah. Now I'm going to click this outside, click once and one next to it, double click. and I got that side. So now I can, makes it a little easier. So now I've just got the rim of my cup in a different color. I'm not sure if that's the color I wanted. I wanted a raw clay kind of look so that I get the dipped ceramic look. But let's just go, since I have this all selected, this is that color that it is. So I can play around with this. Maybe I'll go to, yeah, actually gray looks kind of cool. Just a subtle difference. Done. Close. And now render again. Come on, render. Render. And there's plenty more settings we can mess around with, but let's stop here, and then we'll make another cup and play around with some of those other settings. So once again, this is Brian Galassa. Thank you for checking out my Fusion tutorial.